Lori Kelly, who is a Senior Program Support Assistant in OGE's Compliance Division, and Barbara Mullen-Roth, our Deputy Director for Financial Disclosure. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
So be discussing some of the common errors that we see on public financial disclosure reports for Senate confirmed presidential appointees that come to OGE. Before we get there, I'd like to cover just a couple of announcements. Who tried to join us last week for the 278 review class. Scheduling that soon, so please look for that announcement. We will also have our regularly scheduled events in May. So we're here today to talk about the common errors that OGE sees with public financial disclosure reporting. I know no one likes to send a report to OGE and then immediately get a phone call and say, it would have really helped if you did this, that, or the other thing. So what are our objectives today?
Well, thank you, Patrick. We're really happy to be here with an opportunity to talk about those, this, that, and the other thing, questions that we typically go back to the agency ethics officials on. We are going to focus on 10 of the issues that we encounter in the course of reviewing the public financial disclosure reports that are submitted to OGE for certification. Many of the participants today may be thinking we have a laundry list of common errors, but I'm going to correct you on that, because what we're really focused on is issues that are not made or errors made by the filers, but more issues that we typically see that ethics officials are in the best position to take care of prior to sending the reports to us.
So we have things here that ethics officials who are watching the broadcast, if they make sure they get these right, they can save themselves some trouble and OGE some.
Exactly the point.
Excellent.
That's exactly the point. One of the things I wanted to clarify as we move through this today is that we're going to attack these issues from a more chronological perspective. These are not top 10, one being the worst. We're going to look at them more chronologically as far as the process is concerned.
Sort of in the life cycle of a report.
Exactly.
These are the order in which we're going to encounter them, and if people, as they're processing the reports, can sort of look after some of these things, they'll save themselves some trouble and maybe not get those calls they don't want to get from us.
Exactly.
Excellent.
The basis of our rules of engagement for today, we're going to start at the beginning when the reports are transmitted to OGE for review and certification. And we have Lori here today because she is actually the wizard, if you will, behind the 278 tracking at OGE.gov and integrity curtains. And typically these reports when they come to OGE for review.
Excellent. So Lori, you're the first person to touch these reports. So if we're going to find an error in the first little bit, you're going to be the person to see that. And I understand we've also had a change to recently to a paperless financial disclosure system. I've been here a long time, and I remember when we used to have green folders floating around the office. I understand we've sort of moved into that, and it's paperless. Could you give us a brief description about how that process works, some of the changes, and anything else we need to know as we get started?
Sure, Patrick. Thank you. Yes, OGE has moved to a for public disclosure report processing.
Okay.
Not only at the point that the report is submitted to us, but also within OGE.
Okay.
The reviewers are also processing paperless.
So we have a paperless life cycle here.
We have a
from
paperless
when it comes until it's posted onto the website if applicable. Excellent.
Absolutely. And while we take, if I can just get that slide.
Oh, yeah, you should be able to click forward. There you go.
Excellent. There we go.
There we go. We got the slides now.
Excellent. While we have encouraged agencies to submit reports through 278 tracking in previous years, this year we will require that all reports be submitted either through 278 tracking or processed there either through 278 tracking at OGE.gov, or we have our new e-filing system.
Who are signed up with Integrity submit them through Integrity to us, and those who haven't adopted yet use the 278 tracking email address.
Absolutely.
Electronic reports.
And most importantly, this year, I have to reiterate, we are not We will not accept paper copies of reports.
Okay, so if we want to send a report to OGE, maybe the first thing we want to remember is it has to be submitted. It has to be submitted electronically, either through 278 tracking or integrity.
That's
Excellent.
correct.
And Barb mentioned that one of the issues you frequently run into at the report point of entry. What are some of those issues, and can you discuss them for the folks listening in?
Exactly. As I just mentioned, this year we'll only accept reports submitted through our 278 tracking email or through integrity.
Okay.
Now, when a report comes into OGE, we perform a preliminary prior to assigning it to an OGE reviewer, and that looks something like this. We look for is the report legible?
Okay. So we'll make sure we can make sense of it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And are all required signatures and dates listed? And those arrows there, we are actually looking for those.
So you go through the cover
areas.
page and you say, make sure that there's something in all of those blocks that makes sense and that we can understand and read appropriately.
Absolutely.
And if we don't have those, they're going to hear from us.
That's correct.
Right.
If we don't have those, we'll probably send it back.
But that's an easy thing for folks to check. So before you submit a report, make sure the signatures and dates are there.
Signature and dates are there. Also, our schedules attached.
Okay.
We need to make sure that the page numbers and are all there, because sometimes we may miss a page, or they may miss a page in sending it to us. So one page, when scanning it, one page would and they submitted the report and we end up having to send it back.
So sometimes we might reject a report because of some of these details. Can you give us a little more idea of what's involved in your process as you in-process a report, and some places where you might reject a report? How does that kind of look?
It looks, when we have to reject a report,
yes,
we do our very level best not to.
Yeah.
If we can make a phone call and say, would you like for me to pen and ink this?
Yes.
We will do that.
Okay.
We will do that. But in all cases, we frequently have to.
We can't pen and ink. If you're missing a signature, we're going to have to ask you to submit it again.
Absolutely.
We can't do that for you.
Absolutely. And because the process changed and is changing, there'll probably be more mistakes this year than prior years.
Anytime we have change, we're going to run into some potential issues.
Absolutely.
It sounds like it might be a good idea for ethics officials to implement some internal controls themselves to make sure that they're dealing with these issues before they submit.
Absolutely.
Folks to implement a checklist before submitting to OGE?
We have a checklist here.
Okay.
And it works great.
Excellent.
It works great. So it would be a great idea for them to, even just these three on the screen is a great start.
Yeah. Can we read the report? Do we have the blocks filled out and the schedules attached?
That's correct.
I'm going to interject one quick little note here because it's something we don't think about. We are all looking to conserve the amount of paper we use and to move to a greener operation.
Right.
So we use double-sided copies a lot, and many had been filed and saved at the agency, and it's printed on both sides. But when it gets scanned, we only get one side. So as a part of being a legible report, it needs to also be a complete report. And if you do conserve paper use of the paper, we would like you to remember that we need the back side as well as the front side of those pages.
That's correct.
Excellent. So we need both the odd and even pages,
Right.
not just one or the other.
Right, right.
Excellent. Well, that's a simple enough thing to check, but I can also see how, if you're in a hurry, reports this time of year, that's something folks could miss.
That's correct.
Well, let's move on to some of the issues that OGE reviewers are likely to encounter during the course of the review. Those things that once the report gets through the in-processing and is delivered to the reviewer, that they're likely to see immediately and maybe bounce a report or have to reach out to an ethics official.
Oh, yes,
Yes.
I would say.
That happens sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in keeping with our approach of being kind of chronological, I'm going to start with our next issue. Our second issue is focused on the cover page of the report. And it involves extensions. This is something that we run into regularly. Extensions are a great tool to help filers get their reports finished and completed. And we've been happy to give them extra days if they need it to be able to provide all the information we require on the 278s. One of the things we notice is that we'll get a report and the date that the filer signed and that the date the agency has signed are well past the
due date.
Required due date. But there's no indication on the report that an extension was granted.
Right.
And in most cases, it has been granted. So what we'd like is to encourage agencies to utilize the cover sheet and the very specific block on, and I'm showing, the current OGE Form 278 here for extensions. Not only is there a box to check that an extension's been granted, but there's also a place to indicate how many days the person has been given to complete their report.
And I think this is particularly important with our public reports. And as ethics officials, we get so concerned about the substance of the review, looking for conflicts of interest. There are indeed public reports that members of the public are going to be viewing these. And if they see an untimely filed report, they may assume that someone has merely filed late when they've actually been granted an extension.
Exactly.
And we could leave the impression that there's a problem where there isn't, and we want to avoid that. So while it might seem like a small thing, I think this is actually a very important thing.
Yes, it is.
Well, and it's even with the late filing penalty that the public might think someone was due to pay a late filing penalty when in fact the report wasn't late at all. And we need to really keep on top of that to be sure that it has been filed timely. Now, in addition to the OGE Form 278 that you see on your screen, the 278T, as well as the new report that comes through the integrity system, also include a place indicating that an extension's been granted. One other note on the extensions, we oftentimes will get a report where a 5-day extension has been indicated on the report form.
Right.
But in fact, the person's been given a second extension. So if you do give one of your filers a second extension, please be sure that you also update the form so that we know not to call you when the report comes in.
I think that's a good point, and probably a simple enough thing that that can save us all some time.
Our third issue today is that involves something we can do on the cover page, and it follows just about the late filing fee. So we will frequently have a report that's been filed past the due date, and we call and the agency says, no, we didn't give an extension. We also are going to need to know whether you've either collected or waived the late filing fee that goes along with that. We have to come back to the agency with some instruction to follow up on that, because it would be in our best interest to make sure that all the rules are followed, and this is certainly one of them.
Yeah, timely filing is a requirement. There are ways that we can grant extensions where they're applicable, but sometimes it is necessary to collect the fee.
Exactly, it is. Now, there isn't a specific box on any of the forms of public financial disclosure available to be filled out, but we do have a place in the comments where you could easily put a note that either you've collected the fee, waived the fee. We aren't typically going to ask you why you waived the fee. That's totally at the discretion of the agency. But if you've annotated it somewhere on the report, then we're good to go.
So a good thing to do is if there are any anomalies on the cover page of the report, we want to make sure that those are communicated clearly to OGE in the comments, both for our benefit, so we understand what happened.
Exactly.
Also, anyone who requests the report can see, why something was late, who was responsible for the tardiness of the reporting, etc.
Exactly. Most frequently in the course of reviewing an annual report where on Schedule B a transaction has been reported that should probably have been reported on a 278T.
Yes.
And while we aren't going to ask you if the person has not filed a T, we're not going to ask you to have the late filing fees been waived or collected. While the person has complied with the Stock Act requirement to disclose the transaction on the annual report, it is disclosed late.
Right. So there's the requirement to file timely with the 278Ts, the same as with the annual reports. And if we have late filing, we need to have addressed that at the agency.
Exactly. I guess the other point I would make about that is to make sure that if you do have filers whose reports come to OGE and that they are filing 278Ts, that they also come to OGE. Now, moving on to our fourth issue. This isn't something that necessarily is a problem for us as OGE 278 reviewers, but it does pose a problem for our program review staff. And I thought it would be, this opportunity is a good opportunity to bring this up.
That's always good when we can help them
Exactly.
do their jobs more efficiently and effectively and help agencies be prepared for that eventuality.
Not having the agency receipt date, and that's the day report. And I don't mean the day they've signed it, because sometimes that's not the same day. If you don't have an agency receipt date on the report, then when our program reviewers come in to either conduct plenary reviews or inspections, they have no way to assess the timeliness of your processing of that. And again, this is something that can easily be addressed by using the section on the cover sheet specifically for agency use only. Now, a lot of agencies do this with their reports, but our program reviewers find frequently that they don't, and then they are in kind of a bind as far as how to evaluate the 278 program at that agency.
And I see this come up sometimes where agencies maybe go through a few versions of the same report. Maybe an earlier version had the stamp, and when you ask for the corrected one or the one that includes the dates, it doesn't get pushed through. So we want to make sure that that's there so we can kind of see what happened. We can understand the life cycle of the report.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move off the cover page now and move on to Schedule A. Our fifth issue for today is just a reminder, basically, that underlying holdings need to be properly disclosed. And those underlying holdings are typically found with IRAs or trusts, managed accounts or brokerage accounts. And, we've been harping at but we still run into some issues with regard to filers breaking out adequately some of these types of accounts.
I think this is such a challenge for us because a few years ago it was mostly the 401ks or your 403bs or your 403b or your IRA, and that permutations and types of accounts that have underlying holdings seems to grow every year.
It does.
And each year we have a new kind of account that has underlying assets that need to be disclosed. So I think the managed accounts are one that we're seeing more frequently nowadays. Before it was IRAs, 401ks. But I think it's always a good thing to entry, figure out what it is. Find out if there are underlying holdings if you're not sure what it is.
We used to refer to this as peeling the onion, and I think that's still an adequate analogy for this type of disclosure. Now, our nominee team here does an exceptional job in things up and scrubbing these types of accounts at the time one of our PAS reports comes through the pre-clearance process. And so they've done a great job of being able to get to the root, if you will, of the account at that level. Filers do buy into accounts like this in the course of their term of office, and we need to remember that subsequent reports, annuals, as well as termination reports, that we continue to need to break these things down to their least common denominator. Moving on to our next issue, and this is somewhat connected to these types of accounts. We really would like you not to send us these kinds of statements. I know that we allow them to be sent, brokerage statements or bank statements, but most of the time they are not designed to provide the information required on a financial disclosure report. And more often than not, they give us way too much information.
Right. And we don't want that information. These are public reports. Information that is going to be publicly available, and the possibility of inadvertently releasing some sensitive information increases the more information that's provided on the document.
Yeah, in fact, Patrick, we find personally identifiable information on these types of statements when we do get them. We get them pretty regularly, whether one of the 50 pages they forgot to redact the account number.
Right.
Or where we actually had an interesting situation where an individual through their account had made loans to personal people, and those people's names were actually on the documents, and And as you mentioned, these are publicly releasable and are posted on not only our website, but probably other places as well.
And those persons whose names appeared on the report probably didn't sign up. Disclosure to the public.
That was part of the deal.
No, so yeah, so there's some risk there, and it's significant.
And we know that there are probably some filers who are going to insist on using these statements as part of their either Schedule B or even on Schedule A. But we just job to use a fine-tooth comb to make sure that information has been redacted, and that in fact the statement does provide the information required by the 278 reports. Okay, we're going to move to Schedule B with our next and seventh issue. And so this is a very simple issue that we can address at the ethics official level. There are a lot of PAS folks who accept gifts in a variety of capacities, and oftentimes we don't have any idea what the authority was for accepting the gift. Now, ethics officials, I suspect, have a pretty good idea when they see a gift on one of these reports because they've lengthy discussions with the filer.
They've probably written the opinion.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, hopefully you look in the folder and you say, oh, there's the opinion. We're all good to go.
And so they know when they see it exactly what it is and whether it was allowable or not allowable. Right. And obviously, if it's not allowable, they're probably going to address it. So when we pretty much can assume it's been accepted under a particular authority, but it would be really helpful for us, because we're going to want to know what that is, if you would just put a notation that it was a widely attended gathering acceptance. It was actually a personal friend acceptance. Right. The one thing we do want to be careful of is sometimes we get reports where an individual has included 1353 travel type gifts, and that is not required, not a part of the 278 filing requirements, because the gift is not to the individual, it's to the agency.
Yeah, even though the individual may have enjoyed the benefit, went on the trip or attended the event, the government accepted that for them.
That's exactly
right. It's an authority for agency gift acceptance. And that's true of any other agency gift acceptance authority.
Exactly right. So our 9th and 10th issues involve Schedule C. And number 8 has to do with making sure that any of the agreements or arrangements that an individual has that have reportable income are also reported on Schedule C Part 2. Believe it or not, I know we've been doing this for many, many, many years. We still do have problems where those two don't reconcile.
So we're going to look to see if Schedule C reconciles with Schedule A. If we have a Schedule C entry that seems like it should, we're going to want to see those, and vice versa.
Exactly. It can go both ways.
So that's a pretty quick cross check that we want to do before we send the reports to OGE.
Right. And I'll just add here that when you do have something on Schedule C, especially if it's an ongoing arrangement, a leave of absence or some other such thing, needs to be included on Schedule D, that we also check that as well. It's unlikely because most of the positions have through the nominee review process and are typically not the kind that are associated with those Schedule C Part 2 arrangements, but sometimes they are, and we just want to make sure we've got all of our bases covered.
Excellent.
So moving on to item number 9, again, agreements and arrangements for future employment, something that really only applies to termination reports. When we get a termination report in the normal course of reviewing that report, if we don't anything on Schedule C Part 2 that indicates an agreement or arrangement for future employment, we're going to do an internet search. And that internet search, I would say 50% of the time, is going to uncover some article about the PAS person with regard to their post-government employment, finally retiring and going to spend more time with their families and go fishing and hunting and whatever else their hobbies. But often we get articles that indicate the person is going to move to another position in the private sector. If the article is long enough after the person's termination date that it clearly they probably didn't have an
Right.
agreement to go to work for the or entity prior to leaving their government position, we probably aren't going to come back and ask you. But believe it or not, we've actually had situations where an individual left the government one day and walked in the door of their new post-government employer the very next day, as is described in the article, and there's nothing on their 278. Most of these filers are probably subject to the requirement to disclose these agreements for future employment with ethics officials. So it shouldn't be a surprise.
We have both a technical issue, which is we want to make sure that they've disclosed their arrangement for future employment, but also a substantive issue. We want to make sure that they've received the appropriate post-employment counseling, and that they're fully aware of the restrictions that follow them out the door.
Right. That's exactly right. Okay, so our last issue for today is really just timeliness in general. And of the last probably 2 years, for as long as I've been involved in this function again here at OGE, I think that our timeliness overall has improved. So this isn't really a mistake or an error or a problem, but it's something we can continue to improve on as we especially move into electronic. The full context of what that means. Financial disclosure often falls victim to the multiple demands that we all in government face every day with regard to more work, more tasks, more assignments. And one of the things that I want to caution us about, and we struggle with this here every year when we go through the surge, as we like to call it, of the filing season, is that we don't get too far behind on reviewing and certifying and submitting the reports to OGE. Not filer in injustice, it does the program in injustice. So all of the things that we've talked about today, are we don't follow through and complete the cycle in a reasonable amount of time, we put the filer at risk of falling out of the agreements they've made to recuse, or just to ensure that they are in compliance and continued compliance with their ethics agreements.
Right, because we're in the prevention business here, and the more timely we can review the information that filers are required to provide us, the more complete and timely our advice to them can be. So information that we have that we've not yet looked at is neither helpful to the program, the public who is viewing the report, and especially not the filer who needs it.
Right. Yes, if a financial disclosure is the primary means that we have to do just that, Patrick. Right. And if there were some issue to come up and it was something that the filer wasn't aware of because we hadn't had a chance to look at their report, if there was an apparent conflict might not be aware of because of a new asset they've acquired or a new asset that somebody else acquired for them, we need to keep them position where they are not likely to, engage in an activity that could pose a problem for them later on.
Yeah, a way I like to think about public financial disclosure is that it's an annual request for advice by the employee. The filers don't always look at it that way, but that's in fact what we're doing. We're receiving some information and advising them about potential. Their positions are so senior and important in the government that the Congress thinks they need advice every single year, and we have an obligation to provide that. We can.
And that's a very good point, and it's really the essence of the consultative role that an ethics official plays with these folks of having a problem or running into a conflict.
Right, and the public has the opportunity to look at our work and make sure that we've carried it out effectively.
And with all of that in mind, yesterday OGE published its annual due dates and deadlines and procedures for the 2015 filing season. In that, you'll find information about what dates things are due to you as agency ethics officials, what date reports are OGE, and also some information about the annual status report that we implemented last year for the first time that will go to agency heads summarizing each agency's compliance with the financial disclosure filing requirements for this year. That went up on our website today, and that's Program Advisory 1503.
Excellent. So everyone should take a look at that. I think we may have had a question come in over the Hangout. No. If we have any questions, you can submit them on the Hangout using the app in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if anyone on the phone has a question, we'd be happy to take those now as well.
Thank you. At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star followed by your touch-tone phone. Again, star 1 to ask a question. You will be prompted to record your name.
And while we're waiting for questions to come in, I'll take advantage of a couple of extra minutes here just to talk about ethics agreements generally. Because of the audience, I think that this is something that might be helpful to provide some additional clarification on our most recent advisory back in November with regard to ethics agreement compliance and added flexibilities.
Yes.
I think that everybody understands the requirements for documenting and fulfilling the agreements on divestitures and resignations because they're very black and white.
Right, you either have or you haven't.
Right, you've either sold or you haven't sold, you've either resigned or you haven't resigned.
Right.
Recusals, on the other hand, are kind of a different animal. And I think one of the things to get wrapped up in is that there's not a start and stop date on that. That's a continuous obligation that these presidentially appointed Senate confirmed officials have for the entire time of their term of office.
Right.
That recusal starts and it's not something that is on the same timeline of 90 days as a resignation or a divestiture.
It's the step they're going to take to avoid an actual conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict. So it's essential that they begin that as soon as they begin serving in the government.
Exactly. Now, that we attempted to do with the program advisory, or I guess it was a legal advisory back in November, was to give more flexibility to the ethics officials in deciding how best to implement that recusal. And one of the things we suggested in the legal advisory is that not every recusal that has been engaged in an ethics agreement requires an elaborate screening arrangement. You all in the agencies are the best individuals in the best place to make that call.
Right. And where agencies are the best people to use discretion, we want to make sure they have it, right?
Exactly. But what we wanted to emphasize is that, as I said, the recusal begins the day the person enters the position. There needs to be some recommitment, if you will, of that recusal obligation. Most of these individuals have signed their ethics agreements sometimes up to 6 months prior to their confirmation. It is probably in everybody's best interest, the filer, the agency, and the ethics program generally, that these individuals either make a subsequent statement regarding the recusal, or perhaps even re-sign their ethics agreement, showing that it's current and that they're very well aware of the obligation they've committed to at the time they signed the original document.
And I think this is hard for us as particularly as nominee reviewers, because we spend so much time and it's such an intensive effort to get the report just right, get the ethics agreement properly crafted. And then we say we finally finished it, the report's been cleared and submitted. Then it's important that we remember to do the follow-up work, the work that really matters, which is preventing the conflicts of interest once the folks come on board, which is to say make sure with their ethics agreements.
Exactly. And so, Patrick, that's all I have
Excellent.
For the folks today. And I hope that some questions are coming in.
Okay. Well, thank you both for joining us, and we will wait just a second to see if we have any questions on the phone or on the Hangout. I would like to thank both of you, and I think this is an excellent investment of our time and the folks listening, because you spend half an hour, learn a few things, and if you can save yourself just a handful of questions during a filing season, it's time well spent, substantive work. So being diligent about ensuring that we do things like ensure all the appropriate blocks are checked. Make sure that any filing extensions are noted, note where we collect the late filing fee, etc. By taking care of those on the front end, we free all of our time and energy up to do the substantive work. So thank you guys both very, very much for joining us. We hope you'll come back next year.
Thank you.
And share any updates that you might have on the program. And I'd like to thank everyone who is in the Advanced Practitioner Series today. And we invite you to join us again next month for our Fundamental Series on the second Thursday of each month, and the Advanced Practitioner Series on the third Thursday. Thanks very much.